The scent of salt and lemon polish clung to my fingertips, a quiet reminder that this house, perched like a secret above the sea, was not mine. Still, every morning, I made it feel like someone's home. I knew the rhythm of its creaking floorboards, the way the windows wept in fog, the sigh of the kettle just before it boiled. I was 27, and a housekeeper for a woman I'd never known before answering a job listing taped to a bookstore window. Live-in help needed. Coastal home. Light caretaking. Room and board. It sounded quaint and temporary, and that was exactly what I needed then. Mrs. Peterman was sharp when she wanted to be, but mostly she lived in yesterdays. Some days she confused me with a cousin who died in the 70s. Other days, she'd surprise me by remembering I took my coffee black. I didn't mind. Her silences were warm, not hollow. She reminded me of the grandmother I'd lost too young, except with more pearls and fewer apologies. The house, the Peterman estate, had once been grand. Still was in a weathered, wind-swept way. All whitewashed walls, wraparound porches, and antique clocks that never ticked in time. It stood on the cliffs of Edgeport, Maine, where the ocean never stopped talking. I spent most days dusting memories I didn't own. That Thursday, a letter arrived bearing the name Marshall Crane. I didn't recognize it, but Mrs. Peterman's face lit up like someone had turned the lights back on inside her. "My nephew," she said, tapping the envelope with a finger that trembled. "He's coming." I imagined a man in a pressed shirt, perhaps balding, polite and vaguely dismissive of the help. What arrived 3 days later was something else entirely. Marshall Crane stepped out of battered sedan, in boots thick with road dust. His coat was wrinkled and too thin for the sea air. He had a satchel slung over one shoulder, and the air of someone who'd rather be anywhere else. Tall, with messy dark hair and a mouth that rarely settled between a frown and something nearly sarcastic. He surveyed the house like it owed him something. I offered a polite hello. He responded with a nod, barely brushing past me to get inside. That night, Mrs. Peterman insisted on a full dinner at the table. I made roast chicken, mashed potatoes, sautéed green beans with garlic. The kind of meal that says, "I tried." He barely touched it. She did most of the talking, and he watched her the way people look at photographs they're not sure they remember taking. Afterward, I found a stack of notebooks on the desk in the study he'd claimed as his. Some had spines splitting apart, pages marked with pencil and ink, chaotic margins. Words bled out of them. Angry, lonely words. I didn't read them. Not then, but I felt the weight of them as I tidied around the desk, careful not to move anything. Marshall stayed out of my way, and I stayed out of his. He walked the beach early in the mornings. I could see him from the upstairs windows, hands in his coat pockets, shoulders hunched against the wind. He barely spoke unless spoken to, and even then, words came from him like drops wrung from a dry cloth. When he passed me in the hall, he'd say thanks or sorry, always short and rough like he hadn't used a language in a while. But I watched, not in the way of a girl smitten with a stranger, but like someone who's learned to listen between silences. The way he stared at the fire too long after it went out. The way he lingered in doorways, unsure whether to leave or stay. The way he flinched when Mrs. Peterman forgot his name. On the 5th day, I found him in the kitchen at dawn, drinking tea from a chipped mug and staring out the window. "You're up early," I said, patting it on bare feet. "Didn't sleep?" He didn't look at me, just kept watching the horizon, like it might finally give him answers. I busied myself with boiling water, giving him the dignity of silence. "You live here full time?" he asked finally. "Yes." "You like it?" "I like the quiet," I said, "and the sea." He nodded slowly. "It's loud to me." That was the longest conversation we'd had, and I thought about it for the rest of the day. Nora, my best friend in town, told me over coffee at the cafe where she worked that Marshall Crane was kind of a big deal. A writer, apparently. One of those brooding types who published a best-selling novel 5 years ago and then vanished. "Didn't know you had a tortured artist under that roof," she said, stirring cream into her mug. "Maybe he'll write his comeback novel about the mysterious housekeeper with the soulful eyes." I laughed, but the idea lodged itself somewhere inconvenient. Back at the house, the air had changed. Mrs. Peterman had slipped deeper into her mind, sometimes forgetting what season it was. Marshall had grown quieter. 2. I'd started leaving tea outside his door in the evenings. He never acknowledged it, but the cups were always empty in the morning. One night, as I passed the study, I heard him typing. Not just a clack of keys, but the rhythm of someone who had something to say and finally dared say it. I stood outside that door longer than I should have, listening. Then I walked away barefoot, carrying a cup of cooling tea and questions I hadn't let myself form. I didn't know what changed. Maybe nothing had yet. But I started to feel a shift, like standing at the edge of something vast, toes on the line, the wind daring me to take a step. I was just the housekeeper, and he barely knew I existed. But I had a feeling that was about to change. The letter was folded twice and wedged between the pages of a book on the side table. I wasn't trying to snoop. It slid out when I picked up the novel to dust beneath it. My eyes caught a line, nothing more. Her silence was louder than the storm, and I let it drown me. I froze. The words had teeth, aching and sharp. I read the line again, then forced myself to tuck the page back and return the book exactly as I found it. Still, for the rest of the morning, I heard that sentence echoing. I couldn't tell if it was beautiful or devastating. Maybe both. Marshall found me later in the garden, trimming the lavender back before the frost could ruin it. You read it? Not a question. I straightened slowly. I didn't mean to. It fell out. His jaw tightened. That was private. I know. I paused. It was good. He didn't answer right away. I thought he might walk off. Instead, he crouched beside the bush I was trimming, picked at a weed. I haven't written anything new in almost 2 years. That was old. It didn't read old, I said. He glanced at me. For the first time, his expression softened, not warm exactly, but less guarded. I like your use of silence, I added. His mouth twitched at the corner. Most people like the action scenes. I don't think silence is the absence of action, I said, more honestly than I'd meant to. That night, there was no tea outside his door. Instead, he appeared in the kitchen again, made his own, and sat at the table while I prepared Mrs. Peterman's nightly cocoa. Do you write? He asked, watching me stir. I used to. He nodded. Why'd you stop? I thought about that. Life asked me to be practical. I said yes. Marshall leaned back in the chair. You shouldn't have. The words were so sure, so casually delivered, that they knocked something loose inside me. I didn't reply. I didn't want to admit how badly I wished I hadn't. Over the following week, we shared an odd rhythm. Marshall would vanish for hours to walk or to work, and when he returned, sometimes he'd speak. A few words. A question. An opinion about a book. Slowly, the walls between us began to shift, not fall, but move just enough to let something through. One evening, I found him sitting on the porch swing. He motioned to the seat beside him. The ocean crashed below like it was trying to get our attention. You're different from what I expected, he said. I get that a lot, I replied, settling in beside him. I thought I'd come here to clear my head, but it feels like everything's louder. Maybe you brought the noise with you. He smirked. Maybe I did. I looked at him then, really looked. The kind of man who carried sorrow like luggage he refused to unpack. But there was something else, too, something fragile, half-buried, as if he didn't quite believe he still had the right to hope. Why here? I asked, why now? My aunt's not doing well. I figured I should visit before I became the kind of nephew people speak of in disappointment. She talks about you a lot, I said. Does she remember who I am? I hesitated. Sometimes. When she does, it's with a kind of softness I don't see from her often. Marshall looked down at his hands, turning the handle of his mug. She raised me for a while. He said quietly, when my parents split, I was 12. Angry. She didn't know what to do with me, but she didn't give up. She doesn't talk about that. She wouldn't. She hated how hard it was. We sat in silence. This one wasn't heavy. It just hung there, letting us breathe inside it. You're not what I expected either, I said finally. Oh, I thought you'd be meaner or more arrogant. I'm saving that for the reviews. I laughed, and something in him loosened. His shoulders dropped just a little. The next morning, a notebook appeared on the kitchen counter with a post-it. If you ever write again, maybe this will help. It was blank, aside from the first page. To Claire, because sometimes silence needs a voice. I stood there holding the notebook, like it might vanish. I didn't write anything that day, but I kept it in my apron pocket while I cleaned the library. And that night, when I couldn't sleep, I took it out and scribbled a line. Just one. He didn't know I was watching, but I was, and he looked lonelier than anyone should when they're not alone. We didn't talk about the notebook, not directly, but we spoke more often about stories, yes, but also memories. He told me about his first rejection letter and how he kept it pinned above his desk like a dare. I told him about the story I never finished because it felt too much like my real life. By mid-October, the air had turned crisp and sharp. Marshall spent more time indoors, and our conversations grew longer. The house, once filled with stillness, began to hum with the quiet energy of something beginning. But I was careful, too careful. I knew how quickly things could shift, how often people mistook proximity for intimacy. I reminded myself daily that he was only here for a while, that this wasn't a storybook, and I wasn't a character worth writing about. Still, when I saw him watching me from the study window as I clipped dried roses from the trellis, I felt something I hadn't in years. I felt seen, and it terrified me. The storm rolled in just after sunset, sudden and brash, like it had been waiting for the right moment to make an entrance. The wind shoved against the windows, and the sky turned the color of bruised plum. I just finished securing the shutters when the first branch cracked somewhere out back. Inside, the house felt tighter, smaller. The lights flickered once, then went dark with an audible click, leaving only the dim orange glow of the fireplace in the sitting room. Marshall emerged from the study holding 2 candles, one already lit, the other flickering in his free hand. "You all right?" he asked. "Fine," I said, brushing damp hair from my forehead. "Just wind. Nothing the house hasn't seen before." He handed me the candle, our fingers grazing. I made tea. There's still a bit of heat left in the kettle. We sat at the dining table, the same place he'd ignored a roast chicken weeks ago. Now, with the storm lashing against the walls and candlelight casting long shadows, the room felt unfamiliar, charged. "Mrs. Peterman's asleep?" he asked. "Out like a stone," I said. "She doesn't stir for anything once the cocoa kicks in." He smiled faintly, cradling his mug. I remember, I used to sneak out after she went to bed. Thought I was clever. "Were you?" "Not even a little." She always knew. Just let me think I got away with something. I sipped my tea, watching him over the rim. He looked tired. Not from lack of rest, but the deeper fatigue that settles in when someone's been carrying too much for too long. "You've been writing more," I said gently. He didn't deny it. "You made it seem less like a performance. More like something I missed, not something I failed at." "I didn't do anything." "You listened," he said. "That's more than most." Rain rattled the windows. A crack of thunder followed, close enough to make the walls tremble. The power stayed out. Marshall stood, fetched a blanket from the couch, and draped it over the back of my chair without a word. He returned with a teapot, refilled my cup without asking. The quiet between us no longer felt empty. "Do you ever think about leaving?" he asked suddenly. "Leaving here?" He nodded. "Sometimes," I said. Then I remember what it felt like before I found this place. I was drifting, working jobs that made me forget who I was. Here, at least, I know what I'm waking up to. He leaned back in his chair. "I envy that." "Don't," I said, softer than I intended. "Knowing your place isn't the same as belonging." He looked at me then, long and slow, like trying to read a page that had been torn and taped back together. "I was planning to sell the house," he said. I felt something in me brace. "You hadn't mentioned that." I thought it would be easier to say after it was done, like a clean break. "And now," he shrugged, "now there's too much noise in my head." I didn't reply. I couldn't trust my voice. Instead, I stood and walked the fireplace, staring into the dull orange coals. He followed. "Do you hate me for it?" he asked. "No," I said, "but I'd miss what this house became. For you, for all of us." The space between us closed slowly, like the tide creeping in. He reached out tentative, as if waiting for permission. His fingers brushed my wrist, then settled over my hand. I didn't pull away. "I don't know what this is," he admitted. "Me neither." He stepped closer. The heat of him matched the fire, and for the first time since he arrived, he didn't seem like he was preparing to leave. His hand moved to my cheek, warm and hesitant. I should have said something. Warned him. Warned myself. But I didn't. I let the silence speak instead. When he kissed me, it wasn't dramatic. It wasn't the kind of kiss meant for storybooks or declarations. It was quiet questioning, a brush of closeness, a test of possibility. And when it deepened, it wasn't lust that drove it. It was a mutual ache of people who'd long mistaken solitude for safety. Later, we sat curled on the floor near the hearth, blanket over our shoulders, watching the storm ease its grip on the night. "I should go back to the guest room," he said, barely above a whisper. "You could stay, just until the rain lets up." He looked at me, and after that, I didn't answer. He stayed. We didn't speak again that night. Not about feelings or futures, or what it all meant. We simply sat with the sound of our breaths sinking, the quiet crackle of wood, and the thunder rolling out to sea. As he drifted off beside me, head resting against my shoulder, I stared into firelight, wondering what would happen when morning peeled away the calm. Until that night, I'd been invisible. Now, I wasn't sure if I was ready to be seen. By morning, the storm had broken, but the stillness it left behind felt like something waiting to be named. Pale sunlight filtered through the windows in narrow stripes, catching the edges of scattered books and forgotten teacups. Marshall was already gone when I stirred. No note, no sound, just a faint indent where he'd been beside me hours earlier. I found him in the study, standing at the window with a pen in his hand and his jaw tight, as if trying to rewrite something already written. He didn't turn when I spoke. "Morning." A pause. I didn't mean for last night to happen. I nodded, though the words cut sharper than I expected. But it did. "I don't regret it," he said quickly, as if trying to catch the words before they got lost. "But I don't know how to stay. I've never been good at that." "You don't have to explain," I said, though I wanted him to. Desperately. He looked at me then, eyes tired. "I think I came here to disappear. I thought if I sold the house, it would feel like letting go of something that's been choking me for years. And now," I asked, "now it feels like I'd be cutting off the only real thing I've touched in months." He closed a notebook in front of him, slid it into his bag, and left without another word. I didn't cry. I didn't chase him. I did the laundry. I changed the sheets in the guest room. I watered the dusty ficus near the back door and swept up the leaves the storm had dragged inside. Routine was a mercy. So was the silence for a while. He left a letter in the drawer of the writing desk. I found it 3 days later, looking for a pair of scissors. "Claire, I don't know how to be the man I want to be around you, so I left before I broke something. That's cowardice, not strength. I see that now. But know this, you made me right again. You made me feel like there was more to me than the damage. If I can figure out how to live with that, maybe I'll find my way back. Or maybe you'll write first. Either way, thank you. You mattered more than I ever said." I read the letter once, then again, slower. I didn't keep it in a drawer or under my pillow. I tacked it above my desk like a dare. And I wrote. I wrote about the way tea cools in silence. About how the sea doesn't ask for attention, only presence. I wrote a story, not about him, not really, but about a woman who worked in a house by the water and dared to want more. Nora read it and cried. Then she printed it and mailed it to a journal she loved without telling me. 6 weeks later, I received an email. They wanted to publish it. I said yes before I could talk myself out of it. Then I walked to the edge of the bluff, just past the garden where the lavender had begun to sleep for winter, and I let the wind whip through me. I wasn't invisible. Not anymore. The package came a week after that. No return address. No note. Just a hardcover book wrapped in brown paper. The title was unfamiliar, but the author wasn't. The Quiet Between Us by Marshall Crane. I opened it slowly. Inside the first page was an inscription. To Claire, who reminded me that silence doesn't have to mean absence. I read the book in one sitting. It wasn't a love story in the traditional sense. It was messier, lonelier, full of broken things trying to mend. But on every page, I saw pieces of our days, of stolen conversations, soft silences, the way his hand had found mine like it was always meant to be there. I didn't reach out. Not immediately. I let the days pass like waves, constant but never identical. I wrote more. I tended to Mrs. Peterman. I lived with the echo of something unfinished, but not undone. Then, on a morning painted with spring's first promise, he came back. I saw him from the upstairs window. Same boots, same coat, but slower steps. He carried no bag, no notebook, just himself. I met him at the door. He didn't speak right away. Just looked at me like he was checking to make sure I was real. I let him. I was going to write, I said finally. I hoped you wouldn't have to, he replied. I didn't come for forgiveness. Just a chance to say I still think about you. Every day. I stepped aside, and he entered like someone returning home. Not with triumph, but with reverence. We sat at the kitchen table again, where the storm once found us. There was no dramatic declaration, no sweeping kiss. Just two people who had found their way back to the beginning. I was just a housekeeper, I whispered, almost to myself. He reached for my hand. And I was just a man afraid to stay, he said. We didn't need to say what came next. The future didn't arrive all at once. But it had begun. And for the first time in years, I wasn't afraid to be seen.